Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Welcome to Bible Worm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, professor of religious studies at Hendrix College and theologian in residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish, one Christian.
This week, we're reading the story of the first Passover as told in Exodus 12, 1-13, and 13, 1-8. We talk about God setting the people free from Egypt and wrestle with the violence that seems necessary for God to enact judgments against Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt. We marvel at the resetting of the calendar and the ritual of the Passover that are both instantiated before the Exodus even takes place. And we think about the role of ritual both in preserving the memory of the past and in creating space for new generations to claim the story as their own. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, how are you this lovely day?
It is a lovely day. It is actually a remarkably lovely day weather-wise here. I went running this morning and it was like refreshing and the sky was clear and I could see all these stars and it was great.
Isn't it amazing after the sweaty stickiness of summer when you start over into the fall? How amazing that feels.
I love it.
Well, Amy, we are making our way now. We've completed our survey of the book of Genesis for this year, and now we're headed over into the book of Exodus. We're moving at a pretty quick pace, and so this is Exodus chapter 12, verses 1-13, and 13, verses 1-8. So the crossing of the Red Sea happens in chapter 14, so we have come almost all the way to that story. So there's a little bit at least to catch us up on since the Joseph narrative to hear. What do you think we need to know in order to get ready for today's text?
Okay, so here are the big plot points. As you will recall from last time, Joseph winds up in Egypt, sort of working at the right hand of Pharaoh and sort of managing a famine situation there. And his family, his brothers, wind up moving to Egypt because that is where the famine situation is being managed. That's where there's food. And so as the story goes, though the tribes of Israel, which are all descended from these brothers, live in Egypt and come to live in Egypt. And they live there for many generations and everything is fine and wonderful. They have a great relationship to the Egyptians. And then a Pharaoh arises who does not know Joseph, who doesn't know the Israelites. And he is pretty immediately distressed, really by the sheer number of them. And so he sort of goes about the task of ensuring that they are oppressed enough that they are not going to somehow cause an uprising and cause trouble for him. And so the Israelites come to be enslaved. We get the story of Moses' birth and his upbringing in Pharaoh's house, the story of the burning bush, Moses becoming the sort of human leader of the Israelites and the human representative of God on earth. He really does not want this job, by the way. Unlike Joseph, who seems pretty excited to have his special standing, Moses does not want this special standing, but that is neither here nor there. I think most of our listeners are probably familiar with the story of the 10 plagues. We get the story of the first 9 before our chapter. And so repeatedly we have this pattern where there's a plague and the hope or expectation is that Pharaoh will see, you're not going to win this. The God of Israel is more powerful than you are and will let the Israelites go. And repeatedly it doesn't happen, or Pharaoh changes his mind. It keeps talking about hardening his heart. There are tons of theological issues to grapple with in there, but they are not in our text today. Right. So we'll just put them aside.
Yes.
Right before we start in our chapter, the 10th plague is announced to Pharaoh in chapter 11. But again, it says his heart is hardened and he does not send the Israelites free in order to prevent it from happening. So when we pick up in Exodus chapter 12, we get instructions from God to Moses and Aaron about what the Israelites are supposed to do to prepare for this last and most terrifying plague, and then sort of what's going to go down after.
Can you just remind us what that last and most terrible plague is?
I will, yes. It is the death of the firstborn. All the firstborns, the firstborn animals, the firstborn humans, the firstborn of the powerful people, the firstborn of the lowest folks in the societal ladder, everybody, the death of the firstborn.
I know this isn't exactly our text today, but do you have a sense of why that's the plague, the death of the first? I mean, obviously that's a terrible, traumatic thing to have happen, no matter which born it is, right? But do you have a sense of why the firstborn in particular?
It's such an interesting question because, we've been talking about the firstborn in the conversations, in Genesis about the role in society, the typical role of the firstborn as the most beloved, although the story really kind of plays with that. I guess I think of the firstborn as like, the birth of anything is insanely miraculous.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, as you're saying, every birth is insanely miraculous, the first time it happens is, I don't know, I think there can be a different feeling about it. And so the loss of that first one, I guess, has an especially sharp edge to it. I don't know. Do you have a different way of thinking about that?
I love that way of thinking about it, just a sort of emotional connection. I was also thinking about it just in terms of how power is passed down and those sorts of like the privileged position. And so the loss of the firstborn is a disruption of all of the patterns of
that's right,
succession and all of inheritance and all of those things.
Yeah.
And so it really is a disruptive, like the whole society, the whole pattern on which society is based suddenly becomes upended. So I think there's that piece. But the piece you're talking about with the emotional experience of the firstborn, I think is beautiful.
Yeah, I think they're both right. You're right. It comes from both angles.
One of the ways that you were talking about the Pharaoh and who did not know Joseph, this text is, as we'll see, is going to be a little bit about memory, ensuring memory. And just the way you were talking about the Pharaoh, he didn't have memory. He forgot who Joseph was, and how that set everything on a whole different course. So I don't know that is really something we need to be pondering too much right now, but
it certainly will come up.
It was striking the way that you said that. Amy, I will tell you, as a Christian reader of this text, I often want to just skip right on by Exodus 12 and 13 and get to 14. We've got the plague and then let's just get, and there's all these ritual prescriptions in here, and which are really, they're fascinating and they're very nuanced and detailed. And so I'm just telling you this as your reading partner today, because I feel like this chapter is alive in your practice in a way that it is less alive in my practice. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I'm looking forward to that, to hearing what you think about all of these texts, and also just to let you know that this is not something that I've probably spent a great deal of my time thinking about in my life.
That'll be fun then.
Yeah.
You think some new thoughts.
Yeah. I've been to a few Seders along the way, and all those sorts of things, but this is just such a part of your community's practice.
Although we don't actually slaughter a lamb and put blood on the doorpost during Seders. Just to clarify that.
Yeah. Fair enough.
But yes, there certainly are connections.
Yeah. This is the text from which it all arises, right?
Yeah. Yes.
It's so funny to me, I was thinking about this when I was reading yesterday. People are always talking about how cruel it is to slaughter animals and do stuff with them. And I'm like, people slaughter animals and eat them
I know,
all the time. Or at least somebody else slaughters the animal on their behalf.
Yeah.
Which maybe that makes it feel less slaughtery or something.
I think that's exactly right. I remember someone saying to me, I don't remember who it was, but it really has stuck with me. If you're a vegetarian who is offended by this text, that is one thing.
Right.
If you eat meat, you don't really have a leg to stand on because for the most part, the ways that animals are slaughtered for us to eat in today's society are not better.
Yeah.
Not better than what is happening here.
Yeah.
So we just don't have to look at it.
The only really kind of weird thing that happens here is the spreading of the blood on the doorpost. But otherwise, they're just like cooking a lamb for supper, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, well, perhaps we digress before we gress.
Before we even begin.
We ain't even gressed yet, and we're already digressing. All right, Amy, we're in Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 to 13, and then 13, 1 to 8. And so I'm going to start out by reading about how to prepare the lamb. I'm reading in the Common English Bible. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month will be the first month. It will be the first month of the year for you. Tell the whole Israelite community, on the 10th day of this month, they must take a lamb for each household, a lamb per house. If a household is too small for a lamb, it should share one with a neighbor nearby. You should divide the lamb in proportion to the number of people who will be eating it. Your lamb should be a flawless, year-old male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You should keep close watch over it until the 14th day of this month. At twilight on that day, the whole assembled Israelite community should slaughter their lambs. They should take some of the blood and smear it on the 2 doorposts and on the beam over the door of the houses in which they are eating. That same night, they should eat the meat roasted over the fire. They should eat it along with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Don't eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roast it over fire with its head, legs, and internal organs. Don't let any of it remain until morning, and burn any of it left over in the morning." Amy, the first thing that's here is a timestamp. This will be the first month. From now on, this is the first month of the year for you. It seems as though either previously there wasn't a calendar that they were following or that the calendar had some other start date. Can you just talk a little bit about the significance you think of this now being the first month?
Yeah. I feel a lot of resonance in this naming of this as the first month. You know, it almost reminds me of, maybe this is overstating it a little bit, but like the year 0, like everything's about to change.
Yeah.
Like you're going to start counting from now.
Yes.
And I'm thinking also about, there's a rabbi named Avraham Pam who talks about this text in particular in terms of the difference between an enslaved person and a free person in terms of how they relate to time. Like a free person may very well work very long and hard hours, but they have some control over the time in which they are working, and they have some decisions that they can make about how time is going to work. And so God's saying here, this is going to be the beginning of the year for you, feels to me like God taking that control from whatever calendar they may have been following in Egypt and saying, we're going to orient differently. We're going to orient toward God's time, I guess. I don't know, maybe that sounds a little bit dramatic, but I feel like how we orient to time is really, for me, tied in with our priorities and our perspective on everything.
You know, what you were saying reminded me that the Israelites have been in slavery. I mean, it depends on which text you ask, but something like 400 years.
Yeah.
And so it is highly likely that the way they've been counting time is Egyptian ways of counting time. That's how their life is organized. So I love that way you're thinking about it, of we've been counting time that way because you've been forced to count time that way. Now here's a whole new way that you're going to count time that marks this new transition to a different way of life. What I also love about this is that the Exodus hasn't actually happened yet, right? This is like, before anything happens, this is going to be so big, it's going to change the way you count time.
That's right.
There's just, it feels like, I don't know, looking back on something and saying, my life changed right then is one kind of thing, which is pretty profound. But to look at it before it happens and say, your life is about to change.
Your life is about to change. And this will be the beginning of the year for you. And you don't do anything about that for 10 days.
Yeah.
Like it really builds up the anticipation of it. I had one more thought related to this part that maybe it's just more because I'm thinking about the beginning of the month, but the beginning of the month on the Jewish calendar is the new moon. So it is totally dark. There's no moon. And that's when you see all the stars.
Yeah. Oh.
And so having just read with you a few weeks ago, Genesis 15, where there's both this, your descendants are going to be enslaved for a long time, and they are going to be as many as the stars in the sky. I don't know. I feel both of those sort of called in at the beginning of this text. And when they actually leave Egypt, it'll be around the full moon because it's around the middle of the month. And so that's a very different, kind of orientation. But this, I don't know, the presence of all the stars in the sky at the beginning of this chapter
I love
feels
that, Amy.
Rich to me.
Yeah, remember Genesis 15 when you look up. I love that. Amy, one of the things that's so interesting to me in this part of the text is the care that's taken about the lamb and how much of it. So it's a lamb per house. If there's not enough people in your house to eat a whole lamb, then share it with your neighbors. There's this provision, make sure you eat all of it. If you don't eat all of it, make sure you burn it. So there's not a sense, sometimes like when we have people over to eat dinner at our house, we cook like a extra abundance. So everyone just feels like there's plenty upon plenty. This is not that. This is sort of, you're trying to get the target right. So everybody has just enough, but not more than enough. Do you have thoughts about why or what you can do with that idea about the lamb?
I had two thoughts that sort of switched between them as you were talking. The first one was that I kind of love the attention here towards having just the right amount, not having leftovers, and the direct encouragement to get together with neighbors if that's what you need to do. It seems kind of like there's both this recognition that the household is a thing. Like it's not that there's no such thing as a household and everyone's just a free agent getting together to divide up a lamb. But the household is not the only thing.
Right.
Like it is sort of within the context of your neighbors and, your people. And so the idea that you should orient yourself towards using resources in a way that meets everybody's needs and isn't wasteful is really nice.
Yeah.
It's really nice. But the other thought I had, Bobby, when you were talking about your lovely family or, times when you all have people over for dinner, is that later when we're going to read the strange instructions for this meal, which is like, you should eat fast. Like,
yeah,
that's not usually the way that we would want to have a nice celebratory dinner. This meal is strange.
It's a strange
meal. It's special, but it's not special in the way that, Sunday dinner is special.
Right.
And I never really thought about what an appropriate portion of lamb would be for each person. But you're right. If your main orientation is towards not having leftovers, like there really is this sense, like before you go on a trip, you don't want to cook so much that you're going to have all these leftovers that will go to the waste in the fridge. This is like that on, steroids.
Yeah.
No leftovers.
I like the way you're talking about like sharing with community to make sure everyone has enough, but it is also like, it's not stated that way, right? It's not like if your neighbor doesn't have a lamb. It's
no, that's
if your family is too small to eat a whole lamb, find somebody else. So it accomplishes the same purpose, but it accomplishes the purpose not by sort of saying, oh, that person doesn't have enough, but by saying we have too much.
Yes. You're right. The issue is how to use the resources well. The issue is not who is quote unquote needy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amy, since we're talking about the cooking and eating, in verse 9, so don't eat any of it raw. Like, okay, fair enough. Like, first of all, raw lamb.
Not tempted. Yeah. Okay.
Second of all, like we've had prohibitions since Noah about eating blood, right? But don't boil it. You got to roast it. One of the things that I was reading was talking about how maybe this kind of instruction is about, like, to boil something, you have to have a pot. And this requires, like, human construction of utensils and implements. And that in some ways, this meal feels like it's a step back from that. Like it's the most simple kind of thing. Like you just build a fire and put a lamb on there. And like, there's not a lot of buildup around it. Same with the unleavened bread. Like you don't have to take the time or have the resources to leaven the bread. You just sort of, it's simple in the way that maybe humans would have eaten at an earlier time before they had developed all of these ways of cooking. I don't know. I was kind of struck by that as an interesting explanation. Does that go anywhere for you, or would you read it differently?
I do. I like that. This is not a detail in the text I've spent a whole lot of time thinking about, in part because sometimes with ritual, I don't know, maybe I move too quickly to the place of it's important that things are specific in rituals, but not necessarily because it has a specific translatable meaning. It's just, the point is you can't just do whatever you want.
Right.
But I really do like what you're saying about the simplicity of it. And I like also that, it's weird that they're calling this, they're sort of thinking of this as a Paschal offering in some way. And there are a couple of potential connections in the text to what winds up being the system of sacrifices later. But one of them is this idea that the animal is just cooked over fire. Like, obviously we don't have an altar here, but that's I don't know. That's the other connection that came to my mind.
You were talking earlier, Amy, about it's going to be a new year for you, but then you've got to wait until the 10th day. And so there's this sort of like something momentous is happening. Now wait. There's also the instruction that you should get the lamb on the 10th day, and you should watch it closely until the 14th day.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts? I don't know what to do with it, but it's just interesting that you've got this little lamb under your care for those 4 days. Do you have any thoughts about that little interlude?
Yeah. It's such an interesting combination of things. So you're supposed to have this lamb that is tamim, unblemished is usually how it's translated. I don't remember what your translation said, but it means something like that.
My translation was flawless.
Yeah. Okay.
A flawless is funny to me. Unblemished. Anyway, flawless.
Which that description is actually also used to describe Noah. And Abraham is commanded to walk in God's ways.
Yeah.
In a tamim kind of way. Here, I don't think they're talking about the spiritual qualities of the goat. Although maybe they are. I don't know. I mean, practically speaking, you could say, like, you have to get your goat ready to go a few days beforehand because it really matters when this is going to happen. You can't be late. You can't be stuck without a goat when it's time. And also, you find one that is unblemished, and then you have to make sure it stays unblemished. So, like, you don't want it to break its leg in the 4-day interval that you're keeping it in the backyard or whatever. So, I mean, I think there's that practical aspect of it, but I think the way it's sort of resonating in my heart right now is this, there's just so much effort here on the build up towards that ritual. Like, we've started 10 days early, and then we find this unblemished animal and we just watch it for 4 days.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the emphasis on precision seems tantamount to me.
Some of my Muslim students at Hendrix were talking about Eid al-Adha, which is the festival of the sacrifice of Abraham, which is celebrated at the end of the Hajj. And in that story, that's the story where in the Jewish tradition, Isaac is spared from Abraham having to kill him. In the Muslim tradition, it's Ishmael. And so a goat appears there. Anyway, the way it connects is they were telling me, some of them who grew up in Pakistan and places like that, that you actually purchase the goat and you keep it long enough that you start to feel attached to it, like it's a member of your family, and then you have to sacrifice the goat. And so it feels like you experience the loss a little bit in a different kind of way. And so I was wondering here if that would be a way of reading that, where you have this little sheep or goat for 4 days, and because there's about to be a loss experienced. And so maybe if you're experiencing that or remembering that or acknowledging that or something. I don't know if that goes anywhere, but it's a connection that was in my head.
It's so interesting because the connection was in my head. Well, I shouldn't say the connection was in my head because I did not know that was a tradition within the Muslim community. I was just thinking as a modern person that I imagined that I would begin to have a different relationship to this animal that I had been keeping watch over for 4 days. And then I wondered if I was just being like an overly sensitive urbanite who's not used to having to eat the animals that I've raised, which, folks who live in a more farming environment, that's just the way it goes. But I really appreciate that connection because it adds a little more oomph to that possibility in my mind.
Hi, I'm Terry Peterson, minister of St. John's Church of Scotland in Gourock, west of Glasgow on the Scottish coast. And I am the liturgy writer for Bible Worm, which means I get to spend a lot of time listening to Bobby and Amy, and that is a great joy. It is fascinating to hear them read and talk through stories I thought I knew pretty well, since I'm starting my 3rd time through the narrative lectionary now. I always come away with more ideas than I can fit into a liturgy or a sermon, and working with them has deepened my own spiritual life as I write liturgy that follows the contours of their conversations. I appreciate that they don't shy away from the difficult parts, and that they always find connections between these ancient texts and our contemporary life. And it's fun for me to work those connections into liturgy that empowers worshiping communities to speak to and about God in new ways. If you join the Bible Worm Patreon at the Liturgy Worm level or higher, you'll have access to those liturgies and prayers that you can use or adapt, as well as early access to the podcast. Or there are other levels with different benefits, including Bible studies, access to the Bible Worm Collaborative discussion group, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast to help Bobby and Amy continue creating this incredible resource for people of faith around the world. And now back to this week's podcast.
So in verse 7, we get a ritual detail that we're going to unpack a little bit more in a minute. Take some of the blood and smear it on the doorposts and on the beam over the house. And that's all we really get in the part of the text that we've read so far. So I'm just like, this is just like painting the door frame. Is that basically what's happening?
I think so.
With blood?
Yeah.
Is there anything that we want to say about that now? Or do we want to read the next bit?
Maybe it makes sense to read the next bit because I think the question, imagine a question that will come up for us is, in what ways do we think of this as an offering, and how does it compare to other things that have been described as offerings, or that will be described as offerings later in the text?
Okay, well, let's do that then. I'll pick up in verse 11. This is how you should eat it. You should be dressed with your sandals on your feet and your walking stick in your hand. You should eat the meal in a hurry. It is the Passover of the Lord. I'll pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I'll strike down every oldest child in the land of Egypt, both humans and animals. I'll impose judgments on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be your sign on the houses where you live. Whenever I see the blood, I'll pass over you. No plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Okay, so let's start where we were a minute ago, which is now we understand why the blood on the doorpost, which is God says, when I see the blood, when I pass through Egypt and I see the blood, I'll pass over you. So help me just think about that. I mean, there's so much. I'm just going to say, help me think about that, Amy.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird it's kind of a weird combination of things. And I think there are a lot of different, I feel like we can reach historically maybe backwards in the text to the roots of rituals like this, or we can reach a little bit forward in the text to when we're going to hear about sacrifice in the Mishkan or in the temple. And I don't know how much either of those things will be helpful to us as we sit here thousands of years later and, and try to make sense of it. But one way to understand this is that the blood on the doorpost is the word that's usually used is apotropaic, which is that it has some kind of protective quality. There's even an idea that the word Pesach, which is often translated as Passover, is connected to the idea of protection. So it's almost like somehow you have, cast a spell around the household, like created some field around the household. These ideas are not exactly at home in the Hebrew Bible writ large. But as we've seen before, there are a lot of ideas from religious traditions from around the time of ancient Israel or before that find their way in different ways. And so a lot of people see this as one of those. Because I feel like you could just say what, but doesn't God know where they live?
Yeah, so what would have happened if, I don't know. I mean, what happens if you don't put the blood on the door, and does God know anyway not to go, or would God go in? I mean, there's no way to answer that, obviously, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
One of the details that is always struck me here is at the beginning of that, the blood will be for you a sign.
Yes.
And then God says, when I see it, I'll pass over it. So it is functioning in two ways. One is to sort of warn God away, but the other is it's a sign for you, which I've always took as if you get scared, look at the door and remember that God is protecting you. And so in that sense, the blood functions as much as a comfort for the people in the house as it does as a apotropaic protection for God passing through.
Oh, I like that, Bobby. I mean, I feel like that would be a way to draw connections really to modern practice in both of our traditions. But I know at least in the Jewish community, we speak often about prayer as being something we need to do. It's good for us. It draws us closer to God. It's, not necessarily that God needs us to pray, but we need to do it. And so this is in some ways there's a similar possibility here that we need to do this.
Yeah. One of the things that you were talking about earlier was the sense in which this lamb is an offering. For me, it's very clear that this lamb is a sign. I have always struggled to see in what sense this is an offering. Can you help make that connection for me?
Yeah. So I usually read from the NJPS translation, and the NJPS translation translates the word Pesach as a Passover offering. So a Passover offering to the Lord is how this is described. And so my first question was, it is the case in many offerings in later Israelite religion that some of the animal is consumed by the people, but at least some of the animal is consumed by the Lord. And so it's unclear to me what is being offered to the Lord.
Okay.
I do think it's really interesting. I would not hold on to any of this too tightly, but it's an interesting sort of spiritual thought exercise for me to think about how did sacrifices work later in the tradition, or later in the text, I should say, and are there connections that we want to make here? So I would say later in the text, when we have offerings of animals that are, some of the meat is consumed by the folks who have offered it, some of the meat is consumed by the people who work in the temple, and some of the meat is quote unquote consumed, is burned to be offered to God, that there's a way in which there's a connection created between those entities and that they have shared an animal. So I could think about the ways in which the requirement to share the animal in this particular way could create connections within the community that are important. The other thing that has me thinking about is the use of blood, which here it's on the doorposts of the house. Later on, it is the blood is smeared on the corners of the altar.
Yeah.
And seems to be understood as a way to sort of keep open, keep clean this, I don't know, like point of encounter between the divine and humans.
Yeah.
I don't know what exactly it looks like to think about whether there's some way that we could imagine that smearing blood on the doorpost is opening the potential for some kind of new connection with the divine. I mean, I think you can make the argument that it does, that people have to make the decision to do it, that they're going to do this kind of strange thing for a God that they haven't been in super close touch with for the past 400 years.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm realizing I'm very resistant to reading this as a offering or as a sacrifice. And I'm asking myself why. And when you said, let's read other texts in our traditions or talk about them, for me, it's because this image gets picked up for Jesus in the Gospel of John as Jesus is the Lamb. And so if it's a sacrificial thing, I get stuck in the land of sacrificial atonement, which is not my favorite place to live. If I hold back and say, no, this is a sign, then, or the blood is a protection, but it's not a sacrifice to God, then I can say, in the way that the blood protects the people from God's wrath against Egypt, so Jesus's blood protects Jesus's people when God is destroying the empire. Yet still. And there's not a sacrifice component to it. It's a protective component. And my theology likes that a lot.
I know. I get that. I mean, even if you read this as an offering, and I know this gets turned sort of differently through the lenses that are at play in your mind, but there's nothing here about atonement.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
No one's atoning for anything.
Right.
There's just an offering.
Yeah, but when you start to make the connection of the blood cleanses the altar, and so maybe the blood cleanses you can sort of start to try to find those connections. Yeah, but you're exactly right. There's no atonement here. Yeah. Amy, you were mentioning a little bit ago the way that this meal is eaten. So you're fully dressed, you got your sandals on, you're holding your walking stick in your hand. And
That's
you're
very awkward.
Eating fast. That
is very awkward.
Yeah, this is not a casual dinner at Williamson's house. This is So one of the things that I just find so fascinating here is there's this urgent sense all through this text about something's getting ready to happen. Yeah. But the preparations are very, very deliberate over the course of 14 days.
Yes.
But even though it's deliberate, you still got to act like you're in a hurry. That tension between the deliberateness of the ritual and the urgency of the eating.
Yeah. One of the things that I find honestly kind of amusing in this chapter and to some extent the next is how much that, here they're getting instructions about what's going to happen. And as you're saying, that real sense of when it happens, it reminds me a little bit, maybe I shouldn't make New Testament references, but I've read enough with you now, Bobby, that it reminds me, we've talked about this tension before in some of the conversations about when is Jesus going to come and Jesus coming back and all that stuff, but that it really is, you have to be ready.
Yes.
And in that case, it's going to be whenever it's going to be. In this case, you're getting at least a specific day. Right.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of sort of psychological, spiritual buildup for this peak experience to happen. And then, after this text in this section that we're not going to read, it goes on to talk about how you're going to commemorate this after you already have moved into the land of Egypt. Yes. I mean, after you've moved to the land of Canaan, and how you're going to tell your children about it. It really is. There's a real tension
there absolutely
between the preparation and the urgency, and then how are we going to remember it, and then the urgency, and that, it's fascinating.
I like that way of thinking about it. When it's go time, it's go time.
Yeah.
But the preparation has to be careful. And so there is this careful preparation, but when it's time to be ready, you have to be ready to go. I like that a lot. In the description of God passing through Egypt, so we talked a little bit about I'll strike down every oldest child, human and animal. The next part of that verse is, I will impose judgment on all the gods of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious what you think is the connection between the destruction of the eldest, human and animal, and judgment on the gods.
Oh, gosh, what a good question, Bobby. I don't think I have ever thought about that question before. I have this sense of connection between the firstborn and the God of Israel that I think we're going to read some more about in a little bit. I wonder if that connection existed in the religion or religions of Egypt. And so an attack on the firstborn was not just taking something that was beloved and sort of to a certain degree belonged to the parent, but also was beloved and belonged to the gods. But I don't know if that's true.
I like that. I mean, to me, that's the best. I think that's a really great way to make sense of it. Is that at some level, like the humans and the animals are caught up in this thing that is bigger than themselves, which is this struggle between the gods. And the firstborn is the symbol of that struggle, or the gods have a particular responsibility to protect those firstborn. And so if they can't, then that shows that they have been judged as not gods, or at least as inferior gods. And so this thing that's happening on the mundane human and animal realm is actually, it has a cosmic significance. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it also helps me, I mean, it only helps so much, but like why is God killing firstborn children? And it seems like such a cruel thing to do.
Yeah.
And it is a cruel thing that happens.
Yes.
But when you think of it as people get caught up into these systems that result in destruction, and oftentimes it is people who are seemingly innocent who get caught up in these things, like that is just the way it is. And people end up doing terrible things and getting caught up in terrible things because of where their loyalties lie in terms of the systems of the day. And so maybe that softens it a little bit. Or maybe not.
I mean, I don't know if it softens it, but I think you're right that it gives it some root in the world we know. Like, this is true. This happens, and it's terrible. And we see it here.
Yes. The end of that verse 12, I am the Lord. I mean, it sounds like the holiness code in Leviticus, but just that, like, false gods or judgment on the gods, I am the Lord. Just, I don't know what it is, but that straightforward declaration from God about, like, I'm the one. Like, that's what, at the end of the day, this is about. His God is God, and these other gods are not.
It's interesting in my translation. The Hebrew for that is Ani Adonai,
right,
which doesn't have a verb in it. You certainly could read it as I am the Lord. My translation has it as I, the Lord, like I, the Lord, will do these things.
Oh.
And which I've always read as not the destroyer who,
I see,
comes up in another version, but I myself am going to do these things. But at the end of the day, I don't know if that matters. Like, I think it is. Yeah, this is a cosmic battle that is happening.
Yeah. And one of the things that we're kind of poking around, which is we're not going to solve today, is how does one deal with a text in which God is violent in this way in a sacred text? And I mean, there are reasons for the violence, right? And the oppression of the Israelites over many centuries, and in a text we didn't read, but you were referring to earlier, the Pharaoh had commanded that Israelite children be thrown into the river. And so it's an uncomfortable thing to have this text, but also when you are, especially for people who are held captive to the systems that we live in here and now, to know that there is a God who will intervene in judgment against those systems is a important thing, even though it can also be an uncomfortable thing.
Yes.
Do you have any wisdom about that?
I mean, I actually think what you just said was very wise. We've said many times reading the biblical text that we wish it were true that you could, God could just say like, and the violence stops.
Yes.
But it seems in engaging with the empire in various forms that there is a show of strength that the system seems to require in order to overthrow the evil, genuinely evil systems that are in control that God is trying to overthrow. So it's very uncomfortable, and it happens a lot in the biblical text, and I think also in the world.
Okay, I want to move us on to chapter 13, and I'm just going to read one verse, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll read the rest.
Oh, okay.
So the verse, or maybe it's two verses. I guess it's two verses, because the one verse is just the Lord said to Moses.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? No, I'm just kidding. The Lord said to Moses, "Dedicate to me all your oldest children. Each first offspring from any Israelite womb belongs to me, whether human or animal." Mm-hmm. You were sort of gesturing to this a little bit earlier, but there's a sense in which the firstborn here belongs to God. Can you just talk about what you think that means?
I know we've talked before about this idea that when God frees the Israelites from Egypt, it is not freedom like now you are released from any kind of power over you and you can do whatever you want. It is now you are released from the power of Pharaoh, which is not real and true and good and eternal, and you are released into this system where God reigns, and you are a servant to that system, which is a great thing, but it's not total freedom. Like that's never what they were going for. And I feel like the text goes out of its way to make pretty clear that you're being released from slavery to servitude to God. Mm-hmm. I see this as related to that. Like God passes over the house of the Israelites so that their firstborns are not given over to death. But it's not just freedom, like, great, now your firstborns are totally yours and you can do whatever you want and you're in control and you have all the power. Your firstborns are committed to God, which is a much better outcome.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's not independence. It's not, you're not outside of the system.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question? Or did you mean like in practical terms? What does this mean?
No, that's what I meant. I think that's really lovely. Like the practical terms, like we could probably talk about that, but I don't know that we really need to talk about that. Yeah, I like the sort of theological, symbolic significance of it. You remind us of this a lot, but it's so helpful to me, like set free in order to serve. And so the question of like, you have been working for one set of gods, now you are dedicated to a different God. And that has obligations and expectations. Mm-hmm. And I think it's easy, especially for like Americans who are like, wee, freedom. It's easy to sort of forget that, but that's exactly right. So Amy, I'm going to pick up here in chapter 13 in just a second, but some stuff happens at the end of chapter 12 from where we just were. So can you just catch us up to when we start reading in 13:3, like what has happened in the meantime?
Yeah, I'll do a super short catch up, which is, it happens. The death of the firstborn happens. The Egyptians understandably freak out. And, the Pharaoh not only allows the people to go, but they can't wait to get the Israelites out of there. The Israelites leave and start their journey forward. And there's sort of this like reflection at the end of this. The length of time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. Like it sounds like the end of a period of time has come. And in some sense it has, but as you well know, they have not crossed the sea yet. They just started going.
Yes.
So that's where we are.
Okay, I'll pick up then in chapter 13, verse 3.
Okay.
Moses said to the people, "Remember this day, which is the day that you came out of Egypt, out of the place you were slaves, because the Lord acted with power to bring you out of there. No leavened bread may be eaten. Today in the month of Aviv, you are going to leave. The Lord will bring you to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. It is the land that the Lord promised your ancestors to give to you, a land full of milk and honey. You should perform this ritual in this month. You must eat unleavened bread for 7 days. The 7th day is a festival to the Lord. Only unleavened bread should be eaten for 7 days. No leavened bread and no yeast should be seen among you in your whole country. You should explain to your child on that day, it's because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt." So, Amy, that part that you were describing a minute ago about they're sort of in transit now. The death of the firstborn has happened, but the crossing of the Red Sea is yet still in the future. It's so interesting to me that in the middle of all of that chaos, Moses is starting to talk about remembering. Mm-hmm. And this is the day you were set free. As though, sometimes it's as though it has already been accomplished, and sometimes he acknowledges that you are about to leave. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious what you think about that, like memory making sort of in the process of the thing. It's not remembering something that has happened and the book is closed. It's in the middle of the thing. You're building memories. You have thoughts about that?
You know, one question that came into my head as you were talking, Bobby, that I don't think the text really tells us, but you and I know that things are going to get bad again because the Egyptian army is going to come up behind them and then they're going to have this terrifying experience.
So maybe they know,
I don't know what they're actually feeling. I don't know if they feel like they've gotten out and are kind of like, I don't know what their state is in this moment. We know it's not done. I don't know what they know. But sort of regardless, it is fascinating to me that Moses then fast forwards to when the Lord has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, which is like a long time from now.
Yeah.
That this is how you'll commemorate it. And it's talking about eating unleavened bread. Like, it seems very strange. But what seems significant to me, I think, is this last part that's thinking about what you will tell your child. Because it seems like there is immediately some, I don't know if anxiety is too strong a word, but there's a recognition that everything has changed because of a miracle from God, and that miracle will not continue to live in the world in the same way if it dies with the generation of people who saw it. And so like right in the moment that they're feeling the miracle and are aware of the thing that has happened and are, the very first thing is remember you have to tell your children. Like you're going to have to do something really strange when you're all settled in this new land. You're going to like dietary rules. Why? Why? Because you can't forget, and you're gonna forget. You will forget. You'll be comfortable in the land of Canaan and you'll forget.
I love that, Amy. The way I was kind of thinking about it, which is much more mundane than that, is like I've been traveling a little bit recently and I'm always super anxious, even if I'm just like trying to get to my gate at the airport, and not that the Egyptians aren't even chasing me or anything like that. And for somebody to say like, when you get to your destination, like, here's what you do. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to get there. So to me, that's sort of like telling you about what's coming is like a comfort about the present.
I love that, Bobby. I remember so clearly in these various moments of anxiety when I was growing up, my mom saying something like, she would always refer to the way I'll tell the story. Gosh, it's so connected. The way I'll tell the story to my children. And it always seems fine then because you picture yourself in the future. And however it worked out, it was fine.
Yeah.
And so that always puts the immediate anxieties just sort of like in balance a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, this will make a good story someday.
Yeah. I really love that idea that you're talking about like, yeah, exactly that, but paying attention to the miracle that is happening to you right now also, so that you can keep that feeling alive when you get into the land. Can you talk a little bit about how the Jewish community practices unleavened bread now? You have Passover's at the beginning, right? And then how does all these rituals fit together in a modern Jewish community?
So Passover is in the diaspora generally marked for 8 days. In Israel, it's 7 days. Any holiday in the Torah that says it's 7 days, if you're outside of Israel, many communities add a day because of time changes.
Just to make sure you cover the period?
To make sure you cover the period, yeah. So you have Seder, that sort of ritualized meal. Certainly the first night, many people do the first 2 nights, again, in recognition that we're outside the land of Israel, so our time is a little messed up. But then for the rest of the week, the big imperative is to avoid leaven. And some people, gosh, there's so many practices built up around this, Bobby. So, people have, they try to eat all the leaven out of their house in the, maybe month or so leading up to it. If they wind up with extra leaven, they sell it to someone. I think I sold you my leaven.
You sold me your leaven one time. I wouldn't sell it back to you.
I know.
So you just ate it anyway.
Because you're not supposed to be in possession of it. But there's like a contract that, many synagogues will write up with someone who agrees to formally purchase all the leaven of all the community members. People search their houses with like a candle and a feather for little dusts, like little dusty pieces of leaven. Some people have separate plates that they take out just for Passover because they haven't touched any leaven. People really, however extreme you want to go on this,
yeah,
you can. People do.
And I appreciate you explaining that. Just because it's interesting, but also when you're talking about remember to tell your children, it's when you have experiences like that are rituals like that are so far outside everyday experience that your children are like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And then you can explain. The emphasis on ritual and memory, to me, my tradition is we care about memory, but ritual in the Presbyterian world has become more important, but it's never been our thing. Other than maybe for the 2 sacraments in my tradition, but we're more sort of head people. But I really love this kind of like acting out or like having a thing that you must do every year for the explicit purpose of tell your children what happened.
It's weird to read about it because like intellectually, cerebrally, I can't, like, is this a weird thing to do? Yeah. Why am I doing this? It's weird. It's weird.
Yeah.
But my experience has been that the ritual sort of memory of it, like the flavors of the foods that you only eat at that time of year, and like the smell of the candle, it becomes a very sort of embedded, embodied holiday, but it's hard to explain rationally.
Yeah. Is part of the Seder that you sometimes talk about all Jews having been present at Sinai when the Torah was given. Is there something similar about the Exodus from Egypt?
What it says in the Haggadah is that every Jew is commanded to think of themselves or imagine themselves as having come out of Egypt. Like it is not a story to be told as something that happened to your ancestors. You have to do whatever you have to do to make it alive in your own consciousness. It's challenging.
I love that, and I love the connection that you are making to the land full of milk and honey. and you and I talk about this often, but it's once you get to the land where there is plenty, it's easy to forget where you have come from in the past. And, there's in the book of Deuteronomy and in parts of Leviticus, there's that command, remember you were slaves in Egypt, and therefore this is how you should treat other people, and how you should treat members of your community. But it's easy to forget. And then, 3,000 years later, whatever it is, living in a land of prosperity, like that's not anywhere close to most of our experience. But to be able to tell that story as though it happened to you sort of makes that connection. I think that's really, really beautiful. All right, Amy. Well, this text about Passover and about unleavened bread, about the coming out of Egypt, so much one can think about. Where are you connecting this text with our communities today?
The thing that sort of comes to my mind first is sort of picking up where we just left off, but that question of how to take a story of an incredible miracle that happened many generations in the past and make it feel alive for you. And I will say that one of the struggles that I have, and that a lot of people in the Jewish community I think also have, is that there are so many thousands of years of tradition now built up around the Seder. And Jews like to add things. We don't like to take things away.
Right.
So there's so much tradition built up that sometimes the holiday itself can feel a little oppressive because there are so many things you're supposed to do, so many things you're supposed to read during the Seder, that it doesn't leave space for you to actually entertain, like, what does it mean for me, myself, to imagine that this happened, that I too came out of Egypt. And the best Seders I have ever been to actually have been focused around that question, the question really of like, what are we supposed to be doing at a Seder? We could read this very long script that we have inherited in the Haggadah, which is beautiful and interesting and very academic. I shouldn't say academic. It is not easy for many people to relate to. Or we could jettison the whole thing and come up with something else. I think that what sticks with me in sort of reading this text and the imperative of remembering is we must find a way to remember tradition as it is relayed to us and hold on to ritual as it is passed down to us. That also opens up space for us as real spiritual beings and creatures of God to interact with it ourselves and not only do what our ancestors have done, or there won't be space for us in there. For me, this is like an essential tension in a lot of religious practice in my community, and it is especially so at Passover. That for me is the sort of heart and soul of the question. But I think Passover like puts a fine point on it.
Yes.
But it's always true. Like we always want to learn from our ancestors and absorb their spiritual learnings, but not in a way that clouds out our own experiences with God in the world. So as I read this text, a lot of what I'm thinking is the question that you sort of led us into at the end. What does it mean for us, for me, that this happened and that it happens in some way in the world still? That's how this lives in my heart and my life.
That's really beautiful, Amy. I love that way of thinking about how do we open up space for ourselves to belong in the tradition without sort of overwriting the tradition, which is also a temptation sometimes. And how do we invite future generations into that story as well? So interesting, just as a parent, like I'm struggling a little bit with like how to bring my children into the stories of our tradition without, I don't know, it was sort of without, imposing those stories, but like to invite and to bring in and to welcome.
Yes, that's the question with education, right?
It's
Is
exactly right.
How do we teach them this stuff, but also make them feel that it is theirs?
Mm-hmm. You said something a little bit, it's almost an offhand comment about how it was a new moon when this thing started, and so you could see the stars, and that reminded you of Genesis 15. And I keep coming back to that because, in that moment in Genesis 15, it was Abraham wasn't sure the promise was going to come to fruition, and God said, look up at the stars. Mm-hmm. But there were no children at that moment. And so now we have, here is the promise coming to fruition, but not yet. Like it is yet still in the future. But now there are so many children that they have, become concerning to the Pharaoh. Yeah. And so like the promise has moved along. And so I think I'm resonating a little bit with this idea that even in the middle of making our way to the promised future, there are signposts along the way where we can say, look how far we've come. And here's what we're going to do. Like we are already making rituals about what we're going to do in the future when the promise comes. And there's a sense in which you go ahead and start practicing the ritual, the gratitude, even though it hasn't fully come to fruition yet. And so I think I'm thinking about that and this idea of passing along memory and passing along both memory, but also passing along promise and the future toward which we are moving. And a lot has happened between Abraham and right now, and a lot's going to happen between this story and when the people actually arrive in the land. And yet, like the passing along, the ritualizing, the inhabiting of those memories, even while they're yet still being made. I think that idea is really beautiful.
I love that the text builds in these moments to like stop and look at what's happening.
The other thing that's going on in this text for me, which I guess I can't really ignore, is the Passover itself and the destruction of the firstborn. And we've been talking about that along the way, that this sort of way of reading that as the empire's got its clutches on you. And there is this other way of life that is yet possible. And so there is a certain weirdness, like when you're searching around your house for leaven, like that seems weird from the perspective of somebody who's part of the mainstream culture. And it sets you apart. And there are things like that set people in my tradition apart as well, that following this God that we follow, there is a tension between God and the empire, and it sometimes results in these moments of conflict, or at least these moments of judgment. And there is in this text a promise that we are, in one way or another, because we belong to God, and as long as we remind ourselves and commit ourselves in that way, that God is looking out for us and God will protect us, and that future that we've been talking about is promised, even in these moments where it seems like everything might be falling apart. I think that's an important message in this text as well.
That's beautiful.
All right, Amy, next time we are in Exodus 32, which is the story of Aaron and the golden calf.
Ooh, drama.
Drama time.
All righty.
Thanks for a great conversation, Amy. I'll see you next time.
I'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Bible Worm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details.
Bible Worm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
Join us next time when we'll be discussing the story of Aaron and the golden calf, as told in Exodus 32, 1-14. Until then, keep on digging.